Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be discussing The Nevers, a new Victorian-era superhero show on Now, created by Joss Whedon, and we'll be reviewing Army of the Dead, a new zombie heist movie from Zack Snyder on Netflix. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Yes, this is not the first time I've mentioned this show in this COVID era, but it is the first time I've mentioned it while it's actually got new episodes out and is topical. I am, of course, talking about Lucifer, the crime-solving devil show, which has been running for a few years now, very loosely based on the DC Sandman spin-off comic by Mike Carey. And the character created by Neil Gaiman in Sandman, and featuring, of course, the devil solving crimes in Los Angeles alongside a detective and a whole cast of other police people. And increasingly as the show goes along, also a cast of supernatural angels and so on his own side. And yes, this is series 5B of Lucifer, the second half of season 5, in which, I think the main hook for this section of episodes compared to all the others is that God has finally shown up after 5 years to provide us with a sort of in-person update on Lucifer's daddy issues. And that's the main appeal of this set of episodes, to be honest. Lucifer has been banging on about how much God screws him over and how much he resents God, and as I say, it's very much a show about, like a lot of TV shows, it's a show about a man with daddy issues. And in this case, the son is Lucifer and the daddy is God. And after 4.5 seasons of God being this sort of absentee figure hanging over the show, who's just kind of mentioned in series 5.2 or whatever, God has finally arrived on the show, played by Dennis Haysbert, who's good at it. Yeah, he provides the wide spectrum that one really needs to play God, in which he sort of swings wildly from being benevolent to occasionally incurring a bit of the old wrath. He's got this sort of, I'm being kind and jovial and avuncular, but could I suddenly change gears and fuck you up? It's a very nice performance. So yeah, Lucifer's back, and this is the penultimate season 5. So there's one more lot of episodes coming at some point in the next year or so. I've no idea if they're going to cut this last season into 2 halves as well, but at some point there's one more season coming, and then there will finally be no more Lucifer.
Dennis Haysbert was the president in 24. I think that's what he's best known for. So I can imagine he would be good at playing God, as he does authority figures very well. I remember he plays a colonel or something in Jarhead, and he just sort of crops up playing strong, confident authority figures well. He's quite tall and quite a big guy, so he sort of projects authority very well.
Yeah, it's weird in Lucifer because they've sort of downplayed him a bit in a lot of ways. Like he wears these sort of soft cardigans and he's made up to look quite old. So it's very much about him being this sort of quiet, lovable old man who can suddenly turn on the authority.
Yeah, sounds good. Are they sort of consistently maintaining the quality then?
It's very silly, but yes, they are. You can tell they know they're coming towards the end because the fan service has started to spin up. Old characters are starting to come back, like sometimes quite minor old characters just for cameos, and they're doing sort of occasional self-indulgent joke episodes. They did a musical episode, which wasn't quite as ambitious as the Buffy one, but they didn't write their own songs, but they did do the sort of Glee thing of suddenly bursting into song throughout the episode, singing like various pop hits based on some flimsy magical pretext. So yeah, we're in a bit of a coming towards the end self-indulgent phase, but crucially the plot is still actually going. There is actually still some level of drama, which is where some of these shows can go a bit wrong as they get into this really self-indulgent point. Obviously, like the main thrust of the show is the will they won't they tortured supernatural romance between the 2 lead detectives, and they are still torturing it. It is still not resolved. So at this point in the show, it's almost getting a bit strange, to be honest. Like, they've gone through a lot of the obvious waypoints, like, oh, she's found out he's the devil, they've admitted they have feelings for each other, and we've now reached a point where the drama basically is hinging around, will they actually get into a serious relationship? It's like, this is really rigging out these technicalities to avoid just resolving the show, aren't you? I mean, I guess they've only got like 10 episodes to go after this, so they are pretty close to resolving the show, but nonetheless, they're really going to wring every drop of pain out of this.
I guess a lot of these shows are built around like a will they, won't they. A lot of the tension goes out of it when they resolve that. Be it X-Files, Castle, Frasier. It seems a little pointless when they resolve the will they, won't they. So I imagine they'll keep it going to like the last episode. Friends, again, being another one.
Yeah, with one of these shows, the question of exactly how soon before the end will they finally resolve the will they, won't they, and have them just get together. And I don't know. I'll be surprised if it's the actual final episode, but I imagine it'll be pretty close to that. to be honest. As I say, it's becoming a little tortured, but crucially, although the show is dragging its feet on this relationship a bit, it's not becoming a drag. Like, the show just doesn't focus on it all the time, and it just bops around. There's a whole episode devoted to this sort of ridiculous, vaguely Coen Brothers-esque crime caper involving one of the detective characters. The other detectives, the one who isn't, will they, won't they, with Lucifer. And it's mostly just comedy crime stuff with funny Russian gangsters running around, and the will they, won't they is barely mentioned, which is, what you're after if you want to drag it out for a load more episodes, I guess. And yeah, it's mostly just fun and funny, as Lucifer often is. It's just entertaining. The level of silliness is quite high, but yeah, it's been like that for a while, to be honest. This show was never as good when it was actually taking the crimes vaguely seriously.
Well, I'm glad that it's maintaining its consistent quality and looks like it's building to what could be a good ending if they've only got a few episodes left.
Yeah, I feel like at this point they know what their readers, viewers, whoever we are, want. As I'm sure I've said during previous coverage, they very much wandered off piste in terms of the comics years ago, but if you cared about fidelity to the comics, then there's no reason to watch this, to be honest. They throw in the occasional homage, but we've long ago departed that planet. If you want comics faithful Sandman material, you're probably better off waiting for this TV show that Neil Gaiman's making.
Yeah, well, there's the Audible audio drama as well.
Or that. I haven't heard it, but I hear it's pretty faithful.
Not that we're here just to sell Sandman products. Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably a comic reader of roughly the right generation, but no, I'm not just here to sell Sandman products. Although I will be interested to see if they throw in any more comics Easter eggs before the end. Will Neil Gaiman finally make a cameo? Well, Neil Gaiman did show up playing God, sort of, in a previous season. There was one episode where they had a narrator who was meant to be God, and it was Neil Gaiman. But to everyone's relief, they have recast Dennis Haysbert as God, rather than bringing in Neil Gaiman to do some actoring in these final seasons. Because, I mean, God love him, but I'm not sure he's quite the thespian to do like 2 seasons worth of guest starring, and I think he'd probably agree.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, he's not an actor. He's quite a distinctive person. I mean, he's a good TV, social media personality, but he's clearly not an actor. I mean, I can see why you could have him briefly do a voiceover at some point as the creator of Lucifer. Somewhere between a nod, an homage, and a joke. Yeah, not for 2 seasons of acting.
So yeah, Lucifer's back, and for one fortnight only, it's actually relevant. And yeah, I don't think anyone needs me to tell them to watch Lucifer at this point. You're either watching it or you're not. But yeah, still good, still funny, still one of the most weirdly enjoyable things on television. And yep, that's me, still watching Lucifer. Alistair, what have you been doing?
I've got a TV show to recommend to our listeners that I've very much been enjoying. That's on Channel 4, and you can now catch up on all 4, which is We Are Lady Parts. It's a sitcom with the unusual premise of it's about a group of Muslim women who form a punk band. And it is really, really funny, really good show. I would highly recommend it to our listeners. It's got a really interesting core cast of characters, the 4 members of the band, and plus their manager. They're all sort of interesting, well-developed, kind of funny, unusual people. They've come up with a sort of fairly classic sitcom premise, which is that a new member joins the band who's more straight-laced and shy compared to the other much more out-there punk members of the band, and she has to keep it like a secret from her, again, much more straight-laced friends, and live this kind of double life of kind of straight-laced normality versus secretly being in a punk band, which obviously creates a lot of opportunity for comedic pratfalls. The other characters are well developed, and each one's got their own sort of drama in their life and comedy plot lines that come from that. So yeah, it's just, it's a very good classic sitcom format, 6 half-hour episodes, few set locations, a straight-up sitcom that's very, very funny and also got good music.
Yeah, I've heard about this actually. This has been doing a bit of the rounds on Twitter, people saying it's good, so I have sort of been meaning to watch it. Have you seen all of it?
I've seen all apart from the last episode. Yeah, I've been saving the last one. Yeah, it's so good, I've actually been savouring them, so I've been watching them slowly over about 2 weeks, which considering it's less than 3 hours altogether. I usually go through things much faster than that. But I've seen 5 out of 6, and I can strongly recommend 5 out of 6. Especially the penultimate episode has like a really good cliffhanger.
Yeah, that's one of the other things I've seen about it, yeah. People talking about how good the final 1 or 2 episodes are. So yeah, I need to watch the first 4 episodes just so I can watch the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess now that we're like post-Office, post-thick of it, post-American Office, it is more of a fairly traditional kind of sitcom format in that, there's no postmodern documentary things thrown in or whatever. It is just characters in location. And considering something that's almost certainly unusual, almost even transgressive to show like Muslim women punk band, it's not like a obvious premise for a sitcom, like the hundreds of workplace and dating sitcoms that already exist. It's certainly different. But in terms of its execution, it is kind of very much sticking to the traditional sitcom structure of, slightly silly characters with their weird personality quirks. A character's got to keep a secret, lots of sort of straight up, conflicts when the character has to like attend their best friend's engagement party on the same day that the punk band has an audition, trying to balance the two. So I think it's interesting how it takes the kind of premise and situations that you'd expect from a sitcom that they've kind of been doing in sitcoms forever, but applies them to Muslim women punk band, which is what's unusual. I mean, I don't think I've seen a show or a sitcom that digs into what it means to be a young Muslim woman in Britain today. I mean, there's obviously more women of colour in this show than kind of about 10 shows put together. And also, I don't remember seeing a sitcom recently about punk bands, what it's like to be in a punk band in 21st century Britain. So sort of in terms of subject, it's definitely breaking new ground.
It sounds interesting. Sounds like it's doing something unique. Yeah,
I'd just recommend it, as it's very funny, and it's just like a good solid sitcom. Depending on how the last episode goes, it'll probably be one of my favourite shows of the year so far. I mean, we're only about a third of the way through the year, but still.
Okay, and first up today, we're going to talk about The Nevers, a new sci-fi fantasy show from HBO in the US and showing on now in the UK. This is a story about a bunch of people in Victorian England who suddenly develop superpowers and find themselves a persecuted minority, hiding out in an orphanage owned by a mysterious, morally ambiguous benefactor in a wheelchair. And if this sounds a bit like the X-Men, then that's because it does. And it is. So yes, the focus of this is on the main group of women who run the orphanage on behalf of this mysterious benefactor, led by Amalia True, played by Laura Donnelly, and Penance Adair, played by Anne Skelly, and a cast of what seems to be almost literally thousands. There are so many people in the show. And yes, they must uncover, both the conspiracies by the establishment to destroy them, the evil members of their own community. These are the Touched, by the way. They're called the Touched rather than mutants. So yeah, there are members of the Touched who are on the bad side, especially Malady, a Touched serial killer. And yes, this is, of course, the show famously created by Joss Whedon, only for him to then leave the production. As I understand it, I think he basically left between the production of this first block of 6 episodes and the next one. So we'll have to wait till whenever the next block of 6 episodes drops to see what a post-Joss Whedon The Nevers looks like. But for now, we have seen these first 6 episodes. Alistair, what did you think?
So this is an interesting show. I really enjoyed watching it, but it's not without its flaws. But I felt like it was trying to do a lot and didn't wholly succeed, but I really liked that it kind of aimed high. I mean, you've already said it's got like a very large cast. The characters are, all reasonably well developed, some much more than others. They've each got their own kind of quirks and personalities, their own sort of touched abilities that are unique. There is a lot of different plot lines involving the large cast of characters and huge amount of setting. It really has almost like the feel of a kind of epic, sprawling Victorian novel, like a Dickens book or something like that has a huge numbers of characters, pulls, from all walks of society, pulls in everything from like kind of politics to religion into it. So yeah, it's a very big, ambitious thing. And like many big, ambitious projects, it's kind of straining under the weight of everything it's trying to do. There are flaws. The plot is kind of complicated and I feel at times hard to follow. Some of the ideas can maybe be better executed than they were, but what I did like about the show is its ambition, and I always found myself like intrigued to find out so what's going to happen next, where are all these plot lines going, how are they going to intersect. So I did really actually enjoy watching this, and I would strongly recommend it.
Yeah, I did mostly enjoy watching it as well. A couple of things I may complain about from towards the end of the season, but I'll get to that. I think, broadly speaking, it does a good job of getting this sort of epic world-building / superhero team stuff about right. Like, there's a lot of characters, but they're mostly sort of sketched well enough quite quickly for you to at least get a handle on who they are. It's just about possible to keep track of the different storylines. Some of the characters sometimes seem a bit one-note or tropey, but ultimately there's so many of them, it's hard to know what to say. Like, just by process of elimination, I think Amalia True must be the main character, because she's the one who we spend the most time with, and she's the one whose background and thoughts we probably get the most insight into. But she's also, her motivation is basically incomprehensible at times. It's clarified a bit towards the end, but not entirely. And it's a slightly odd note to play on. Like, normally your main character would be someone a bit more relatable. And like you were saying about We Are Lady Parts, it would be the newcomer coming into the group. Like at the beginning of the show, like the very first scene, not the world's biggest spoilers, they go on a mission to recruit a young Touched who is trapped at home with her parents who don't really know what to do with her, which is, again, very X-Men, but anyway. And they do recruit this woman and they take her back to their orphanage and introduce her to the gang, and you'd really expect that character to end up being our sort of POV lead, but she is still there throughout the season as a presence. Her power turns out to come in handy for a couple of things. She isn't the lead, no. Our lead is still Amalia True, who is very much a sort of, if I'm really going to keep pushing the X-Men comparisons, she's quite Wolverine, in that she's cool, and she's a fun person to spend time with, but she's clearly, her motivation is hidden from us, and sometimes it seems even a bit from herself. I don't know, I find it very interesting. As you say, I'm very impressed by the amount they're doing. I sometimes feel like they're making it slightly hard to really get into and access. I spent as much time going, right, what's happening here, as I did actually being immersed in the story.
Yeah, I definitely had that feeling of kind of like, wait, what's going on? And like sometimes like, who's that? Oh, he's the guy who does that, you know. And I completely agree with you that it's like, it was a slightly odd decision to start with like an opening that's like very similar to the first Hugh Jackman X-Men film. You know, if like a young teenage girl is struggling to live with her family because of her abilities and she gets taken into the group. It's, you know, when they were trying to find a way, I guess, into X-Men for the film, the addition of a young new person to Xavier's school is kind of the ideal way to do it. Yeah, I don't know if they hampered themselves or tied their hands by the new character in this. Her ability is the fact that she kind of speaks every language other than English and kind of moves between them, and it's not a particularly accessible character, someone you can't understand what they're saying.
Well, that's not really how the construction works, though. I mean, they could have had that character be one of the background players and given the new character something more accessible if they wanted to use her, but they clearly never wanted to use her in that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a sort of baffling series of decisions to make. There's lots of shows with like huge casts and really, really developed worlds, lots of storylines going lots of directions, but they're usually on their about kind of 5th or 6th season. You know, I could think of probably like a show I followed all the way through was like Stargate SG-1. By the time you got into their like 5th or 6th season, there was huge numbers of worlds, alien civilizations, different technologies, plot lines, all sorts of stuff, but it kind of began from kind of a core group of characters going out and meeting characters and adding threads to the tapestry until it was very big and very complicated over a long period of time. Sometimes I feel with this show, and this might have been a deliberate decision, that it's almost like they've dropped us in at a late series point. I mean, there's various flashbacks filling in backstory. There's certainly a lot of backstory to fill in, but it does feel like, yeah, they've, rather than kind of start with like a few characters and build out, they've just decided to go with just loads from the beginning.
Yeah, which again, I can't really fault them for ambition, but as a result, it's quite hard sometimes to get a handle on. But I mean, cutting back to positivity, it's still a fun show to watch from scene to scene. The jokes often work. The main characters who are given space on screen, the ones who are meant to be likeable, actually are likeable. Yeah, you've got the sort of the dutiful lead character, Amalia True, and the slightly more lovable sidekick, Penance, who I think a lot of people have compared them to Buffy and Willow, and it's probably not a completely dead comparison. They've got a very immediate connection and they're very easy to follow and root for, and the show clearly realises that as one of the big sort of character beats later in the season is those two having a massive falling out over something. That's the one thing they've worked hard to put across, so that's the thing they should push for to make us feel emotion towards their ending, and that sort of thing works. The Joss Whedonisms are definitely there. I did watch a Joss Whedon show voluntarily, so what did I really expect? Although obviously, given where we are culturally with Joss Whedon at the moment, that may be more annoying to you than it might have been. And it will be interesting to see how much they remain once we get to episodes made after his departure. Like the villain Malady, the sort of touched serial killer, is, I forget how much Buffy Alistair has seen, so I don't know how far this reference will go over your head, but she is very a bit Drusilla. She is, very similar to the Drusilla character from Buffy, at least in the way she speaks. Probably doesn't help that Drusilla had a very Victoriana fashion sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely spotted the Whedonisms in this. There are some themes he touches on a lot, from Buffy to Firefly to Avengers. There's found family, kind of people coming together through sort of persecution and being socially ostracized and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing those shows have in common, which is kind of different from the Nevers, is that in Firefly, Buffy, and whatever the other one was, its focus is on quite a small unit. Even in Firefly, which does have a whole world to set up, it doesn't actually get that much into the wider world building. It is mostly just focused on the characters inside the spaceship, and it sort of expects you to pick up the world building as they travel around. And kudos to him, I guess, to some degree for trying something new. But that approach does feel a lot more, easily accessible and watchable than the Nevers, where he tries to genuinely cover the entire world and just sort of expects you to pick it up in one big block.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Again, it's very much like a later series thing. Buffy, especially the early episodes, is just about the core group, the Scooby Squad. Firefly, as you say, rarely leaves the ship, or rarely leaves the kind of point of view of the ship characters, even when they leave the ship. But this has kind of got all sorts of other bits thrown in, like this establishment plot to control or restrain the touched. There's this gentleman's club, sort of private society stroke sex club for people who find the touched fascinating or alluring. There's a plot line involving criminal underworld characters played by Nick Frost, I thought, doing a very good sinister turn. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on outside the school or the orphanage, and you know, maybe a more accessible show would have just focused much more tightly on the characters in the orphanage going out meeting other members of the touched, and then slowly expanded to draw in like all these other elements.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fault their ambition, I guess, and I don't know. I think they're attempting to create this feeling of a fully realised world, and it's I don't know. As I say, it feels slightly overly tropey. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it never feels quite like a real world that lives and breathes. It still kind of feels like a collection of sci-fi fantasy tropes. Again, written entertainingly with a decent range of distinct characters, but still, I never feel like it quite came alive for me, even though it's a perfectly watchable TV show for the most part, but it's not confusing me.
Yeah, I mean, for example, although I enjoyed the show, it's not necessarily one I would recommend to people who weren't already big fans of sci-fi fantasy things. Unlike, say, Firefly is a show I always say to anyone who enjoys TV, like, watch this. It's just great TV. I know even if you don't like things with spaceships in them, you'll enjoy this. This is one maybe more for at least the genre fans, if not the Whedon fans, because it's not one of those things that's just like, holy shit, this is amazing TV, like Dark was, for example. It's more something like, well, this is an interesting take on some well-trodden tropes in an entertaining way, but it's not necessarily doing something, at least in these first 6 episodes, that's super captivating, although I did enjoy watching it. It's a sort of damning with faint praise, which was not my intention.
Yeah, I'm intrigued enough to watch the rest. It's honestly just to see how they'll put it together. Towards the end of this run of 6 episodes, the one part that did genuinely annoy me, like for the most part, I think it's got its flaws, but I'm mostly interested. But it did make the mistake of slightly annoying me towards the end. At some point in episode 5, Alana True starts talking about the Galanthy, seemingly out of nowhere, like how we have to go and find the Galanthy. But I don't know how much this is a spoiler. Let's assume not very. And it's not been mentioned before, and this ends up being the root of her massive argument with Penance that I mentioned. She wants to go and investigate the Galanthy. Penance wants to do something else related to the wider plot, which is, more about the plight of the touched as a people, obfuscating a bit, but and they end up having this massive fight about it. It's all very emotional, but they never tell us what a Galanthy is or why Amalia cares so much about it. It's just something she suddenly starts talking about, and for whatever reason, that particular episode where she started doing that was what kind of tipped me over into, okay, this is actually kind of annoying now. She's just started banging on about this thing, and it's the root of her conflict in this episode, but I have no idea what it is. I feel like I've genuinely missed an episode. I feel like there should be an episode between 4 and 5 where she finds out something about the mysterious Galanthy and becomes obsessed with it, but you didn't make that episode, and as a result, this comes across really weird.
Yeah, I found that very confusing as well. And almost had that thing like, wait, did I miss an episode or did I miss a crucial scene?
Yeah.
It is confusing like that. I mean, I've been thinking about this, and it's one of the show's more ambitious elements, and it kind of relates to both what I kind of like about the show and what I don't like about the show, is that what they've done is they've pretty much cut all exposition. There are some exposition bits, especially like when the core characters meet a new character, but there is very little exposition, and there's absolutely no maid and butler dialogue. And I guess for people who don't know what maid and butler dialogue is, it's usually any sentence a character that starts with "as you know." In other words, it's a thing that two people would never say to each other, but it's there to pass information to the audience, and it's unnatural. But sometimes it's necessary, and it's a sign of bad writing. If you can get around it, that's good writing. What they've done in this show is just basically cut it entirely. So it's kind of weird in that this lack of exposition means that, again, there's no really clunky scenes. Amalia doesn't say to Penance, "As you know, I'm looking for the Galanthy, which is da-da-da-da-da." And that would be just clunky and awkward. But instead it's confusing because it's not there.
What's annoying is that Penance doesn't really know the significance of the Galanthy, so we could just have a scene where Amalia explains it.
Yeah, which would not be maid and butler dialogue, because that's how you get around it. You get a character who knows something, Amalia, pass crucial information to a character who doesn't know something, and that the audience can eavesdrop on. But I don't know if it's due to running time, because there was a lot to get in, or it was like a creative decision they made that, like, no exposition, the audience just has to find their feet. I've read a lot of books that do the kind of sci-fi books that do the whole no exposition thing, figure it out as you go. One of the advantages of a book is that you can just easily flick back a couple of pages and read over something to make sure that you've got it all straight. I don't want to go too much into the final episode, but the final episode really cranks up the no exposition, loads of stuff just thrown at you, figure it out for yourself, you're smart.
The final episode is kind of a lot of exposition, although it does start quite obliquely.
Yeah. But it's one of the weird things about this show that, again, is one of its more ambitious elements, is that it doesn't slowly spoon feed you what you need to know, like a lot of shows do. It just kind of chucks it at you and goes like, figure it out for yourself. Look, what do you want me to do? Tell you what to do? I'm just the writer.
Well, yeah, I know. And a lot of the time it sort of works. Like, it's fine. It's watchable enough. You can sort of figure it out, even if it does mean that, like I said, you're sometimes more interpreting this show than you are enjoying it. But, yeah, I just found the Galampi thing, for some reason, because it wasn't something she was acting on or something that I was seeing in action. It was just something she kept banging on about. And it was just a bit sort of, if this is so incredibly important to your character, you should maybe tell us what it is. But yeah, I don't know. And for some reason, that was slightly what pushed me over to the edge of being annoyed with the show in the final couple of episodes. But whatever, I will probably still come back and watch the rest of it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it and we'll definitely come back to it. I liked how it handled the politics, of the era. It brought in lots of things about Victorian politics, poverty, the treatment of women. There's a subplot in one episode about an industrial dispute. One of the villains is a lord and an industrialist who's wielding both his economic and aristocratic power to grind down people and keep himself and his friends very much at the top of the social pyramid. And what I also crucially liked about the show is that a criticism that's been made of X-Men is that, once you replace all the politics of our world with the politics of your created world, so when the kind of your metaphor about persecution, racism, hatred is wrapped up in being a mutant or being touched, it can move over the complexities of the real world, the different types of oppression, the difference between, racism, sexism, class-based prejudice. Obviously the real world is more complicated. What I did like about the Nethers is that not only did it have its obvious metaphor that, like I say, very X-Men, of it's sad that people hate these people for being different and we shouldn't hate them, and which is a good accessible message, but also it did manage to bring in as well, it did talk about the gender politics, the racial politics, the sort of class politics of the age as well. It didn't just talk about the touched and the non-touched. Having that kind of more complex social fabric was one of the ambitious things that made it this kind of epic sprawling thing that I did like. I know that one of the staff writers was journalist and author Laurie Penny. I don't know to what degree that's her influence, bringing in lots of contemporary themes of social justice and intersectionality. Could also be a lot of the other writers who are also interested in that. It was seemed very politically engaged and quite politically aware, and weaved that into its bizarre, all over the place, sprawling story, but it was definitely present.
Well, yeah, stopping to do stuff about, the actual Victorian world as well as the made-up touched stuff definitely didn't make it any less complicated, but yeah, it was good that they actually made some effort to do that as well.
You made it sort of believable. Like, there's an interesting bit when Penance is frowned on or kind of treated unfairly because she's Irish, which was a popular prejudice at the time. And it's interesting they are bringing that in without saying, like, it would have been simpler if they just said, look, we'll just talk about the touched and the non-touched and why it's sad that everyone hates the touched and everyone will get it. But they actually did a more complex version, which I like.
Yeah, that's a popular criticism of the X-Men, isn't it? That, using the mutants thing as a replacement for all forms of prejudice means you could do a story about prejudice against minorities, but still make it about a bunch of straight, attractive white people.
Exactly. Who live in a private school.
It's a hard knock life, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, there was an episode with a whole massive twist involving mistaken identity, which I thought was pretty clever. I don't really have a huge amount more to say about it, and I feel bad spoiling it. But one of the episodes has a very good twist that I very much enjoyed.
Yeah, that was, again, they pulled the wool over my eyes with that one. I do appreciate a twist that I don't see coming because through many years of watching TV, sometimes I can see through the twists.
Yeah, maybe there's a few good twists in this show, to be fair. The one thing this show does have with its dense and sometimes incomprehensible world building is it can sometimes put out a good surprise. And it doesn't always feel like they've just pulled it out their arse.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with this show is not there isn't enough plot, definitely. It's interesting. I guess I'm glad they're doing another 6 episodes because my fear was like, well, that's a lot of interesting ideas that kind of feel maybe a little bit half-baked at time and possibly a foundation for something interesting. I really hope it doesn't get cancelled after 6 episodes and we never find out if the potential could lead to something. So the fact there will be another 6 might mean basically we might be sitting here in a year's time and saying, so all that confusing stuff was a kind of a good foundation for them to tell this really super cool story. Or we might be just sitting here scratching our heads and going like, well, I didn't need Victorian Twin Peaks, but I guess I've got it.
Yeah, they've gone from slightly confusing to truly incomprehensible. I mean, who knows? Maybe the next showrunner, as you say, will push it all the way into David Lynch territory. I'm interested enough to find out. Okay, and second up today, we're going to have a chat about Army of the Dead, the new zombie heist movie directed by Zack Snyder. This is a new release on Netflix, and apparently the beginning of some kind of franchise. I gather they've already commissioned like 2 prequels, so I hope it's amazing. This is a caper movie starring Dave Bautista, in which Las Vegas has been cleared out by a zombie horde and abandoned by the US, and now in order to, reclaim the real estate for, I don't know, build some flats on or something, I guess, they've decided to just nuke it to finish off all the zombies. However, before the nukes go down, Dave Bautista, a guy who apparently escaped from Las Vegas shortly before the zombies took over and it was walled off in an impressive, violent way, has been recruited to go back in to retrieve a huge amount of money from the cellar, the basement vault thing of one of the casinos. So this is a full-on heist. He recruits a specialist crew to do the job. They must find their way into walled-off Las Vegas and battle their way through the zombies to this vault and then battle their way out again. And predictably, things go wrong, especially because, for convoluted but very emotionally relatable reasons, Dave Bautista has his estranged daughter with him. So yep, we have both seen this film. Alistair, what did you think of it?
So it's entertaining, and it kind of broadly struck me as a sort of C+ film that kind of, yeah, I enjoyed that. Probably not going to go on the list of best films of the year. But the kind of strongest impression I was left with this film was I really felt it missed like a lot of opportunities to be better. So it could have been a lot funnier, which is kind of what I was expecting. And I really felt there was a lot of potential in the setting that just wasn't exploited enough. I mean, there's a sense of, everyone knows kind of the image of Las Vegas, that it's this party town, it's a city of like excess, like drugs, gangsters, violence, self-indulgence, drug taking, boozing, gambling, high living, excessive stuff, the whole what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas sort of thing. There's this whole like over the top culture that goes with it, through the Vegas residencies of artists from like Elvis to Liberace. There's a real kind of like louder than life quality that Vegas has, and mixing that with the kind of over the top nature of like super gory zombie movies, you could end up with something that's like really silly and funny, kind of mixing this kind of the hyper reality of Las Vegas with the kind of hyper violence of zombie films. And they didn't really do that. I felt that like
they did that for about 5 minutes in the intro.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When the opening sequence, where they have Viva Las Vegas, or a cover of it, playing over people killing zombies to kind of fill in the kind of origin of the zombies, I thought like that, I felt really set the tone for a film that didn't do that anymore. I mean, it's set in Vegas, and the posters and iconography and things like that, the film trying to make a lot of like it's a zombie movie in Vegas, but other than the fact that like several set pieces take place in casinos, it really could be set anywhere. I mean, it could be set in Atlanta. Atlanta has casinos. They really could have done so much more with the Vegas setting and the sense of place that Vegas has to make this a more entertaining film. But to be honest, it's just another generic zombie killing film.
Well, yeah, I would almost rather have seen the film they were skimming over in the intro. But yeah, I more or less enjoyed it. I think I probably liked it slightly more than you did. It's been long enough since I watched The Walking Dead. I haven't bothered with it for a couple of years now. But, I've had a period of zombie abstinence. I've stopped getting with the zombies long enough to maybe be able to enjoy them for a little while. And I found this perfectly fine, watchable, zombie heist action. It's very tropey and predictable. I think I made a remark about the Nevers being a bit tropey, but to be honest, that was probably borderline insulting when I'm putting it next to this, which is just a series of tropes. As Alistair said, it's very dry and often humorless. There's not a huge amount of self-awareness or commentary, which I get, it's a Zack Snyder film. The same was basically true of, say, Zack Snyder's Justice League. But yeah, it's a very decent rendition of what it's doing. It just, it's not very adventurous or exciting. And why is it so long, Jesus Christ? Like, someone needs to stop making these films so long for no reason. It's 2.5 hours. This film could have been done in 1.5 hours, and it definitely should have been done in less than 2. It's insane that this film is 2.5 hours long.
That is a big problem, and I do agree. I completely agree with that. It's slow paced. I mean, again, we talked about this Viva Las Vegas bit at the beginning, but it's ridiculously long, and it's got this like, really long, slow musical intro, and it's like it's the classic problem with Snyder stuff is that like everything is too long and there's just loads of like large bits that could be quite easily cut. Like there's a whole bit like following kind of the internal, I guess we should say, politics of the zombies. There are like some zombies that are like more intelligent and have some kind of primitive society thing and they live in the Roman themed casino Caesar's Palace. I don't know if they're trying to say something with that, but it's just not necessary. The zombies can just be zombies. And in fact, the crucial and scary piece of plot relevant information is actually delivered separately from that by another character that says, it's not just mindless shamblers. Some of them are intelligent and organised. They're dangerous. We've got to be careful. And then for some reason we're told that, and I was like, ooh, that's interesting. That's tense. I wasn't expecting that. But then we get a lot of scenes of them being, intelligent and, I don't know, doing stuff amongst themselves, and you just feel that, like, this is not necessary. It broadens out the world, yeah, but it just also makes the film long.
A lot of it is just, long, slow shots of things. Like, I feel like you could make the, less than 2 hour version of this film without cutting out basically any plot. You might have to lose a couple of members of the heist team, I guess. But, yeah, the 2 hour version of this wouldn't have to lose that much plot. It would just have to have a couple less filler characters and a few less long, slow shots of things.
Yeah, this is the same problem with Justice League. I mean, I know we've reviewed it, everyone's reviewed it, everyone's had their 2 cents on the very long film. But yeah, it's just like lots of slow, long shots of things. Everything's just taking like a bit too long. An editor just needs to stand up to the guy at some point.
I think at some point the Zack Snyder brand became the films will be long. What the Zack Snyder audience wants is the long, unedited version of his vision. So I guess for now at least that's what they're getting. I don't know if at some point there'll be a backlash and he'll decide to climb down on this a bit. I think a lot of the reviews for this film have mentioned that it's just far too long, so maybe he'll take that into account. I don't know. And if that's the case, then hi Zack, the film is too long. But yeah, it seems to be what he's doing at the moment. I mean, the thing is, even compared to Justice League, Justice League, yes, 4 hours, you may be surprised to hear is too long for a superhero film. But at least it had a lot of plot in it. If I sat down with my pen and paper and listed everything that happened in Zack Snyder's Justice League, there would at least be a list of a decent length. Yes, some of it would be kind of busy work, but at least a load of things happened. If I sat down with my pen and paper and listed everything that happened in Army of the Dead, it would not be a very long list at all. It's just a bit of a... It just feels like a very, very simplistic, straightforward film to be this long.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not a lot of character development in it. I mean, each character's kind of got their own individual personality and dynamic, but there's not a lot of depth. For Dave Bautista's character is a tough man who's got a troubled past because of having to make difficult decisions during the initial stage of the zombie outbreak. He's estranged from his daughter. It's like, again, we're not breaking new ground here.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't spoil it, but one can quite easily guess what will happen to his character in the end.
Yeah. And
one is unsurprised when it does.
Of the core cast of what must be closer to 12 characters, there's at least 4 haunted badasses. At least there's male and female haunted badasses in this one. Gender equality is making some progress. There are some interesting supporting characters who've got their interesting turns. I did like Ludwig, the safecracker. I thought was a sort of slightly interesting different character who's sort of German and a bit pretentious.
Yeah, he was a good character. And I also quite liked his relationship with one of the other characters.
Vanderhoor.
Yeah,
played by Omri Hardwick. Yeah, they had a good dynamic. That was one of the bits of the film that really worked. There was some progression in their characters and their relationship. There were some good bits. So the film had workable ideas just buried under generic army stuff, to be honest. Tons and tons of it.
Yeah, and Tig Notaro's playing a fun character. It's a fairly small part, and it's a bit of a one-joke character, but she is quite fun.
Yeah, she's excellent. I mean, I really enjoyed her in Star Trek Discovery. Again, turning up playing a very similar character, but, she's entertaining. She does good stuff. She's good in this.
Apparently she was CGI'd into this film after the previous cast member was cut out due to sexual misconduct allegations. So there's some impressive technology news.
I did not know that. Although there were some interesting shots when there were some bits where I thought there was an odd dynamic of scenes when she's talked to through the other side of a fence and things like that. She doesn't appear in the same shot as the other characters, and that must have just been editing around that. And she does a lot of scenes by herself, on a roof talking over the radio to other people. It kind of actually makes sense now when we think about it.
Well, yeah, although I don't know what they were doing with the previous version with the previous actor and whether it just happened to be that way or whether they've drastically cut around to make it that way, but we may never know. But yeah, anyway, so I thought that was an interesting bit of trivia. And indeed, she is good. Dave Bautista is good. I mean, as I say, it's a very, very tropey character to the point of comedy, but he does play it well. Dave Bautista continuing to carve out his niche as the thinking man's Rock. the big action dude to give it a bit more dramatic heft, a bit more sense of vulnerability.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's good in this. I mean, obviously, his character is not original. Again, one of the core group of haunted badasses with the troubled past. But he is very much the kind of character you would expect from an army zombie-killing action movie. And that kind of character is, I think, fine. A better film, we'd be saying, he's the kind of tropey core character that's there to build the film around, surrounded by this kind of cast of interesting supporting characters, each who have their own kind of tick. I mean, lots of superhero films do this. Davis, the kind of fairly generic hero with his interesting supporting cast. But the supporting cast from this are, again, another group of like haunted badasses and a few people who are pretty much zombie fodder. He would look like a more interesting character if he was surrounded by more interesting characters. And if this film didn't just spend so much time doing generic army people killing zombies. For example, one character that I felt had sort of like missed opportunity to be a more interesting character was Mikey. Like, this film has quite a big cast. His deal is that he's like a YouTuber zombie killer, and that he kills zombies and puts it on YouTube, and as all the iconography of the YouTuber and stuff, like him shooting like zombies in the head and then going like and subscribe, and that's kind of funny. And they recruit him to the team because they find his YouTube channel. And then I kind of thought like, oh, is there going to be a thing? He's going to be one to be like quickly like, I need to shoot some bits for my channel whilst there's horde of zombies coming towards them. But as soon as they get into Las Vegas, now he's just another dude with guns who shoots zombies. Like, what made his character a character is just vanishes. At one point, someone comments that he has nice hair, and I was like, yeah, you've taken the character who could have been interesting and reduced him to a haircut.
Yeah, I know what you mean. They don't really give anyone that much to do, which is odd considering the sheer amount of time and space they have. I mean, I guess if they'd given a detailed character plot line to the YouTuber character, the film might have been half an hour longer, I don't know. But yeah, it's odd how shallow and superficial it all seems considering how long it is.
It just needed one or two scenes of the dude running around with his iPhone and a halo light, trying to get like a decent bit for his Instagram with some zombies in the background, and everyone else being like, dude, what are you doing? They're coming to eat your brains. It just needed that to kind of be a bit like, oh, this is funny, this is different, rather than just yet another scene of like zombies piling into a corridor, people like just unloading with guns and blood and guts going there. I mean, like, I did play Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's nicely enough shot action. I mean, Zack Snyder has his visual style. It's quite dark, it's quite heavy, it's quite grim and stark. And it works well enough for like zombie action. I think he's done, I'm not a Zack Snyder scholar, but I believe he's done zombie films before, and he could definitely, film a zombie dying.
Yeah. In terms of, army zombie stuff, there's nothing to dislike here. It's entertaining. I can't sit there go like, or watched it one evening after work to be like, yep, that was a way to unwind after work and completely forget the troubles of the world and just focus on a nice bit of ultra-violence. But like I say, what do you benefit from this film that you don't get from, I don't know, watching Predator? I mean, other than this is new, very little.
Yeah, I find it odd that they've got aggressive franchise plans for this, because, and in some ways I guess this is a good thing, the film doesn't seem to be aggressively trying to franchise. I didn't come out of this thinking, wow, think of the world, the wider world they could expand with other projects. It seems quite self-contained.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, I was on some level thinking, do you know what? This is quite refreshing to see a film that's just going to be like, right, zombies in Vegas, army dudes killing them, right? You get in, you do it, you go out. Very like almost like a military mission. It doesn't need to set up 20,000 sequels.
The two projects they're making are apparently prequels. I guess they're not doing that, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see. There's a prequel film about the Dieter character, who I guess was one of the more interesting characters, but not to the extent that I was thinking spin-off. But who knows? Yeah,
well, we'll see. I mean, if their plan is to take that opening musical montage and expand that into a film, that could work. Yeah, there were some interesting bits in there. And I think one of the characters they threw up was basically like a soccer mum who became a badass vigilante, almost a bit like the soccer mum character from Orphan Black. And again, that's a sort of interesting character journey. How does the all-American mum become like a zombie-slaying badass? But again, like the film we saw, it's just full of haunted badasses with lots of guns. But if they had to make this film to work out what the good film to make is in this world, then fair enough. But that's usually what early stages of the script drafting process are for.
Part of me feels bad kicking it too hard, but it's competent enough. There's just not a lot to it.
Yeah, like I say, if you're done with the day's work or the week's work and you fancy, cracking a beer and switching off from the world and relaxing, you won't be unentertained. Like I say, there's almost nothing that this has to offer that you can't also gain from just sticking on Predator on DVD or Commando. I mean, those aren't zombie movies or Evil Dead. I don't know what this film is adding that basically your kind of Ort's DVD collection is probably not already stuffed with. But it is entertaining, and, if you say like, man, I want to unwind and, just enjoy some Hollywood action, I was like, yeah, go for it. You won't be disappointed.
Although personally, if I wanted a sharp burst of Hollywood action, and apparently I am harping on this, I'd watch something shorter.
Yeah, like Predator.
You get it, Jesus.
That's all we have time for today. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And whilst you're there, please leave us a review. as it helps others find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find back issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself. If you head over there now, you can read about the 10 songs that got me through lockdown.
And if you want still more sweet content from us, you can follow Moderate Fantasy Violence on Twitter, where it's at MFV Podcast, or on Facebook, where you can find it by just searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. And if you want to follow me individually, you can find me on Twitter as @NickMB, or my website is nickbryan.com. Thank you.
And if you want to follow me individually, you can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. Next time, we will be discussing Sweet Tooth from Netflix and Solos from Amazon Prime. Join us then to find out what we thought of those. Until then, have a good fortnight. Goodbye.
Bye. Okay, yep.
I don't know why I did Sean Connery there, but
Why not?
why not?
Big in prejudice against the Scottish. We've already done the Irish.
Yeah. That's one thing the show didn't touch on. The dastardly Scots. I get to say that because I'm Scottish.